Dude, this thing hauls some serious ass. Ladies and gentlemen, 2017 BMW M3. This is the F80 generation. And this is the ZCP. We got competition pack, Yas Marina Blue with Silverstone interior. You guys are gonna see that shortly. Now the owner has done a few cosmetic mods. He's actually added a lot of, well, the competition pack already comes with carbon fiber, but he's added a lot more carbon fiber that feels very OEM. He did a very good job, I think, of matching the aesthetic. Carbon fiber here and all around there. He actually powder coated his wheels black as well. I'm actually really digging this spec personally. And in terms of the actual performance mods, he's done an active auto work, equal length mid pipe. It helps a little bit with the power, but mostly with the sound, as you're gonna find out. He's even done these carbon fiber pieces on the back of the seats, which you gotta love. And I think this is, it looks just as modern as the current M3, but it's far less offensive. Like that front end, I can get behind, you know? It doesn't look like this is a previous gen. It doesn't look like this is old. It looks very modern, looks very current. And I think elegant, timeless design, not overstyled, not beaver teeth, pig nose, whatever you wanna call it. Oh, nice bolstering, I like that. So we're gonna start this. We'll go M2, the most aggressive everything. M1 is halfway, sport, and we can actually individually adjust each of these settings right here. So maybe we'll start with efficient, comfort, and steering and comfort as well. The engine, in case you're wondering, is an S55. It's a twin turbo, 3-liter inline 6, and in the competition spec, pushes out 444 horsepower. Normal spec is 425, and it has 406 pound-feet of torque. We're weighing in around 36 and some change pounds. Ooh. Definitely a bit of turbo lag with this engine. Although the throttle response is actually quite consistent and immediate, it's very easy to heel toe, or even just regular rev match. And one of the reasons I love the M3s is, of course, the practicality. You have 4 doors, 4 seats, but also the dual personality. So this is a car that right now in comfort mode, I mean, I'm just cruising, I'm chilling, I'm relaxed, I'm having a good time. Suspension is firm, but not punishingly so. The steering is not too heavy. You actually do feel a very significant change in the weighting, going from comfort to sport. This is, of course, rack and pinion, electrically power assisted. And I realize, and the reason I was saying it's so easy to rev match is because this has auto rev match enabled. I'm actually not sure how to disable that, so we're just gonna leave it on. And then when you're done cruising around in comfort, you then hit the M2 button. Everything goes into the sport setting. The steering is instantly much heavier. Throttle response much more aggressive. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Try to double clutches into first. Lord. Dude, this thing hauls some serious ass. Oh my God. even the brakes, as soon as you get on them, they're so precise. There's no vagueness, there's no squish. Very much confidence inspiring. What a rocket ship. This is also when BMWs got way more numb with the steering. So the steering is actually very sharp, really quite precise, but not getting much feedback at all. And that weighting is very artificial. It's not changing as much as you would expect with getting weight over the front when you're braking into a corner and you know, giving it some steering input. Steering really not as communicative as I would like, but you know, good weighting, good ratio, good accuracy. Really like these brakes. They actually kind of remind me of some Porsches. They're just so solid and confidence inspiring. Really appreciate that. Even the seats, really great bolstering. I'm not sliding around. Granted, not putting in a terribly high amount of G-forces on these sweepers. It takes a solid second at least for you to get that boost, even above 4,000 RPM. Curious to see how much the suspension changes going to comfort. We're going to keep the steering and the throttle in the sportiest setting, and now suspension is in comfort. It's still a firm ride. Notice that difference going from Sport Plus to Comfort. This is around the time when the M3s are getting heavier and heavier, and to keep that body control in check, BMW is having to really stiffen up the ride. You know, the G80 is definitely far stiffer than this, to the point where I actually find that to be uncomfortable as a daily driver, because I've driven that both on track and on the streets, and it's an incredibly capable vehicle. But I would say this is a little bit more livable with the suspension. This is also, what, 400-ish, 300 to 400-ish pounds lighter than that later generation. You can feel in comfort this would be fine. You know, it's not a soft plush ride, but it's not overly punishing either. I think those who want a really well-rounded dual-purpose vehicle are going to be happy with this. And unlike some of the other cars that we've been driving today, again, we're comparing all the M3 and all M5 generations. Check out the playlist we have linked in the description. The added mass here is very much felt over the E46. Obviously the E46, much older car, much smaller, two-door, M3. Such a rocket. But with that added weight, you get a little bit of it feels like this little layer of disconnect compared to some of the older generation M3s, the lighter M3s, the more raw and visceral M3s. You're lacking a lot of steering feel here. And while the chassis feels connected, that heft, it's a very different driving experience versus something like E92, E46. After driving the G80 M3 on the same road, I can confidently say the G80 drives far superiorly in terms of connectedness, predictability, and confidence behind the wheel. This F80 chassis gives you some level of feel of the road, but not quite the same level of understanding as to what the car is doing, which is why on some high-speed sweepers, when you're carrying speed and getting a little bit of lateral G, you actually feel a little bit of nervousness and disconnect within the vehicle from the driver's seat. This is really when BMW starts, you know, I heard a theory that BMW is trying to make the ideal Autobahn missile, so that's why the steering is getting more numb, you know, the engines are getting more powerful, the NVH, you're getting more and more isolated. And these are just kind of trends within the automotive industry, right? For cars to be more comfortable and refined. But some may argue, hey, like why is the steering less communicative than it was before? And you could say that, hey, you don't necessarily want a really chatty steering. You want it to be very precise, but you want to isolate yourself from any of the NVH, right? But I think this is when you start seeing the M3 transform into its modern era, where it's a bit more numb. It's more and more capable with each generation, of course. More and more powerful, more and more impressive, technically speaking, but you're removing some of that connection. And now it feels like there's a thicker and thicker layer with each generation where the driver is getting further removed from what's actually happening with the car. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think a lot of us are driving enthusiasts and we want that purity. But if you want a daily driver, you want a car that's comfortable day to day, then maybe you want that. You want a little bit more isolation and don't mind the numbness. But don't think that this is a car that is going to feel at home and feel super raw and communicative on track. After driving all 6th generation M3 on this road, I have some additional context here. There are 6 generations, and it makes sense to organize them in 3 pairings. And those pairings are now organized by old school versus modern, and analog versus digital. The first 2 generations are both old school and analog. I think you guys understand what analog means, and old school is the very slow inputs, not as responsive, slower steering ratio, longer throws with the transmission, more travel and less firmness with the various pedals. The middle 2 generations are now modern, but analog. So you still retain the analog nature, but the modern is now more responsive. And then the final 2 are both digital and modern. Digital meaning now you feel far more disconnected from the actual vehicle. And oftentimes, the first generation of that pairing isn't as refined as the second, except for the E46, E90 are both really solid. But if you look at E30 versus E36, the E36 takes that ethos of analog and old school and refines it further. Same thing here, the F80 G80, the G80 feels like an F80 that's just better in every way. They took that same philosophy of digital and modern and actually improved it to its maximum. It's very heavy. It doesn't speak to you in the same way as other generations. But again, depending on what you want, that may not necessarily be a bad thing. And going back to how modern this car feels, I'm not sure which iDrive generation this is. I don't have them all memorized. But it still feels relatively modern. I mean, sure, you may argue, hey, the bezels and the screen resolution and brightness and display and whatever, it's still pretty close. You don't feel like you're in a very dated car by any means. This feels very much modern, and the steering wheel is so incredibly chunky. It feels like it gets chunkier and chunkier. And if you have big hands, I think it actually feels quite nice. Smaller hands might be less fitting. There are many things to appreciate about what BMW has done with the M3. I love that they still have a manual handbrake here. But with this generation, you see them now focusing more on the car's capabilities from a performance perspective rather than its connectedness, driving dynamics. You know, what is the ultimate driving machine? Is it about just performance, or is it also about the reward and the experience behind the wheel? I would argue it's the latter. And while I definitely appreciate and respect this car, it feels to me like they put a significant layer between the experience of driving, you know, the driver and the vehicle, The twin turbo, you know, there's significant lag as an example, not as responsive. You start getting the rubberiness of the shifter here. Throw is a little bit longer than I would have expected. And also the disconnected feel of the chassis when you're going higher speed around some corners. Steering again, being rather numb. Brakes though, I mean, I really love the brakes on this. And the body control with the chassis, I think, is definitely one of its strengths as well. And of course, it's possibly the last good-looking M3 before Beaver Teeth Gate, or whatever you want to call it. But my friends, I'm curious, what do you think of the F80 BMW M3? Let me know with a comment down below. If you want to see your car reviewed on Jubbal and Cars, visit us on jubbalandcars.com. Fill out the form on the homepage. Subscribe if you haven't already, my friends. Much love, and I'll see you all in that next one.